Hi everyone, my name is Trenton Beckendorf. I'm a third-year computer science major at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm heavily involved in entrepreneurship at UT, very interested in seeing the new programs that are arising as part of this new collaboration between McCombs and the College of Natural Sciences. And we're here tonight to have a fireside chat with Danielle Applestone, who is the CEO of Bantam Tools and the co-founder of Other Machine Company. She revolutionized hardware development and dramatically increased the accessibility of high-precision electronics prototyping. Her company reduced the size of massive industrial mills to desktop-sized machines, and they can be used without training. Hear about the challenges she faced and the lessons learned, and see how that led her hardware startup to be a success story today. That's what we're here to discuss. As our first question, I have essentially, for those in the audience who are unfamiliar with your startups and the companies that you formed, can you give us just a brief startup pitch, I guess, about what they do and the impact that they have?
Yeah, well, Bantam Tools is my current company, and it was formed after a government grant, actually. And we build high-precision desktop CNC milling machines. And that's a fancy way of saying there's a robot that cuts metal for you. And the reason why we were successful is we designed products that had professional reliability and precision, but they are also affordable and easy to use. So what we wanted to do was make a tool that you could use. Whatever your interest was, if you're in computer science and maybe you want to tinker a little bit with electronics, well, you don't have to get trained on this machine. You can just build your own electronics in your dorm room or wherever this machine happens to be, because it's only 25 pounds and software is free. So that's kind of the biggest thing I think I've done that impacts the student population of a place like UT.
So your CNC mills are for everyone. They're not just for the experts or the professionals.
Yeah, I will say that anyone can use them. We have kids that are 8 years old in the middle of Hawaii prototyping their own electronics. We also have scientists at NASA using the machine, and that's what makes it really unique. But primarily people are using it if they have a need for it. They're a professional electrical engineer and they want to prototype quickly. Maybe they have an idea for something that they want to convince their boss to let them do, and it's really easy to do that with a physical part, so they use our machine to do that.
And so one of the things that I've heard people say when they interview you or when they describe you is that you are a leading figure in what is now called the Makers Movement. Can you tell me what that is and why is it happening now?
I think you're the only one who's actually ever said that. But that's thank you, I guess. There was not a maker movement when I was a kid. It was just a bunch of, well, all the farm kids made stuff. But now I think the maker movement is in some ways a reaction to that. There's not a lot of making and fabricating and using your hands and using tools in everyday life. So we came up with this thing called the Maker Movement because we realized it's really important to have a population that has the skills of fixing things and building things. So that's what the Maker Movement is to me. It's a recognition that these are important skills for people to have and a way to make there be an easy entry point for anybody who is curious.
Is this something that you've always had in your mind? This is the idea that I need to pursue? Or how did that come about?
No. Okay. I'm just sort of falling through life at this point from thing to thing. The only thing that I knew is that I wanted to get out of Arkansas, and science and engineering was the way to do it. And so after I left Arkansas, I went to MIT and I studied chemical engineering, and then I started a software business, which it's still running, but I ran that for 13 years and went to grad school and studied batteries, and the whole time it was just an accumulation of skills that seemed unrelated but happened to be totally relevant to what I'm doing now. And I think that's just what a startup, like people who are in startups are those kind of people, I think. You're just kind of curious, you follow it for a while, you pick up some skills, and then you apply those skills to whatever you're doing next.
And so you never intentionally pursued those skills in hopes of, this big picture idea, the company that you're going to one day form. It was what you were interested in along the way, maybe what caught your eye?
Yeah, it was just an opportunity. And I think the only truly conscious decision that I made about my career was I spent a summer carrying cement for my uncle who did stucco and being up on top of a 50-foot ladder and looking at a solar panel and being like, well, I don't want to do this forever. And I bet if wind wins or solar wins or whatever in the renewable energy space, they're always going to need a battery. So I'm going to work on batteries. And then I applied to UT and got in and came the very next fall to here. And that was a really conscious decision. And after I graduated from here, I thought I wanted to go to Tesla and work there, building batteries. But I had lunch with a friend and he said, hey, wouldn't you like to create a machine that would create millions of engineers over time, which was the precursor to my current project. Mm-hmm. At that time, we were working on them specifically for high schools, thinking about what does shop class look like in the 2000s.
Is that what led you to pursue the DARPA grant, just talking with your friend and also the previous research that you were working on?
Well, he had already gotten the grant and didn't have a way to run it. So he was trying to convince me to join him, and he was super persuasive. So.
And Tesla at that time, it was in their battery division, right? Which is now a very large organization. Do you have any regrets about that?
No, there was a moment of regret, though. So this DARPA grant was supposed to be 3 years and $8 million, and it ended after 4 months due to government sequestration. So at that moment, I did call up my contact at Tesla, and she was like, no, the job's been filled already, and we're not really sure what's going to happen. So for a brief moment, I had some regret. But besides that, in my life, whenever I've been offered an opportunity where I can leap ahead of many different stages, go from being a lab scientist to the CEO, even if it's a CEO of a 20-person company, that's a big leap. It would take me a long time to get that kind of responsibility and that kind of exposure if I worked my way up at Tesla.
You mentioned that you grew up in rural Arkansas. When we speak to entrepreneurs, one of the things they often mention are the people that led them to their current path. Were there any early childhood influencers that you can think about in your life that led to who you see yourself as today, or maybe the values that you carry?
Yeah, my grandparents were both programmers at IBM, and so they wanted me to realize that the world was a lot bigger than the 6,000 person town that I lived in. So they would be sending me books every birthday or every Christmas to be like, hey, there's a big world out here, you should go explore it. And my dad, who was in a wheelchair, was very empowering to me because we had a workshop and it was all about, let's fix this in the house. And I was the only person around. So I was the one who was fixing things and determining what was the best solution for getting a chair to roll under a certain place or whatever. And so that super shaped me. But the moment of time in my life when I realized science was my ticket was I had a gifted and talented teacher, Miss Riley, and she just said, you should think about applying for this free science camp. Just go for 2 weeks. And I had never been away from my home or anything like that. And I went there and I thought, this is all the people that are like me. There's just a bunch of nerd kids in Arkansas. And I just thought, I've got to get more of that. I want more of that. And so I ended up applying to a math and science magnet school in Arkansas and just kept trying to surround myself with great people who were thinking about hard problems in a creative way. And I'm still doing that.
Awesome. One of the things that I also wanted to ask about was entrepreneurs, every day you're having to make decisions. You are the leader of a growing company. What are some of the most difficult decisions that you've had to make as an entrepreneur? I
think the most difficult decision that I had to make at other machine company, which now is Bantam Tools, was when I realized that we had designed a product which we felt really great about, and it served educators and makers, and we had been selling it into the world, and we had banged on a lot of the doors, digitally, that we, everywhere we had thought to sell it, and realizing that we had made a product which served them well, but was too expensive for them. And having to talk to the team and say, I know you joined this team because you really care about educators and you care about kids' access to high precision tools, but we're gonna have to sell to professional engineers, and we're gonna have to sell to professional electrical engineers. And that was quite a shock, and it was really hard also for the engineers on the team who had wrapped up their whole identity into what this product was. And so I said, it's got to be for professional electrical engineers. These are the specs that it needs to have. By the way, it's not going to be 2,000, it's going to be 3,000 because that's how much they will pay. And for some people, it was impossible to make that leap. And so I had to say, well, I really appreciate the work that you've done for us, but in order for the business to succeed, I have to let you go. We have to take this company in a new direction. And it was hard because it's sort of one of those moral compass decisions where I'm like, I got into this business because I want to build machines for kids like me. But that's not really viable. Like, that path that we chose wasn't going to work. So we're going to have to go this way, and then we're going to have to go that way and this way, and then we'll eventually get to it. But that was by far the most difficult.
And so along the way, you mentioned maintaining the voice of your company. When it comes to forming a company, one of the main components often that we hear about is the funding, financing your company.
Right.
When it comes to venture capitalists and angel investors, their agendas don't always line up with how you view your company. Did you have any challenges with regard to that?
Yes. I don't think that I would have sold the company if I hadn't had venture capital and angel backers. But then again, the company wouldn't exist unless I had angel or venture capital backers. So they played a significant role in making sure that I was always focused on high growth. But then once we had turned over every rock and it was clear that we weren't going to be able to achieve that, I asked for more money and it wasn't there. And it was the hard point of, I felt like I knew what the next product needed to be, the one that was really going to be for the larger market. We had done enough work to know exactly what that product needed to be, but they were not willing to fund it, and so the only other option was acquisition. So I think that's fine. The outcome is actually quite good for if you sell your company and you can continue to serve your customers. That's a miracle, honestly. And so I felt like I had to give up some things because of the expectations of the money that we took. But overall, it was an incredible experience, and I feel like talking to investors now, they feel satisfied that we definitely tried our best, but it's still risky to put more money in when you've already put a lot of money in is risky, and some people have the appetite for it and some don't. So,
if you're speaking to new entrepreneurs, people that are starting to enter the space, are there any words of caution that you have regarding funding? Or I guess words of advice might be the better phrase.
Yeah. My words of advice are all around expectations. And that's true for any relationship that you're in. A roommate, what are the expectations? It's the same thing. It's like having a really honest conversation. And that may be hard because you really want your company to exist. And you might feel like you're willing to say anything and take money from anyone to have it happen, but you will pay for those kind of rash decisions. Like, if you don't have the honest conversation about what are we going to do with this money, what do you want in return for this money, and how confident do you feel in your ability to deliver on the promises that you make in order to get that money. But besides that, I can't give general advice because every technology and every group of founders is different.
Mm-hmm. So moving around just a little bit, diversity in academia and industry. It's very important to you. You speak a lot across the country about it. Mm-hmm. Have there been repetitive challenges as you've gone through academia, as you've gone through founding your own company and working in the industry that you have faced with regard to working as a woman in a male-dominated STEM field?
If I have been adversely affected, I haven't noticed.
Okay.
So probably, I do remember a couple specific times, only in pitch meetings with venture capitalists that had the wrong style for my style, mm-hmm. Feeling like there was just a different attitude towards me. Mm-hmm. But there's plenty of people out there who won't treat you that way. And I think I just kind of put the blinders on. I must put the blinders on and move past it. But I will say that even as a woman, I find it easier to hire women. I'll find women, they reach out to me. But when thinking about other areas of diversity at my own company, we struggle too with adding people of color to our staff because I don't have as much innate contacts in that field. So I find that, this is what it must feel like to be a man trying to hire a woman. I need to know more people. I need to reach out to different groups, and it has to be a consistent effort. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I probably, to summarize,
your
probably.
company has been very successful, though, mm-hmm. in hiring a gender diverse workforce. Mm-hmm. You're employing roughly 50% women now. Mm-hmm. Are there any lessons that you think another company could look at your company and see what improvements they could be making internally to their own hiring process?
I think the most important thing, if thinking about startups, because mm-hmm. that's what we're here to discuss, I wouldn't underestimate the value of hiring a woman or person of color as one of your first 3 hires. And that includes the founders. So if you don't do that, then you won't have access to different networks. And you also won't have the perspectives that are going to allow you to be really creative in the early stages, because in the early stages you are burning through so many new ideas all the time, mm-hmm. and the broader the perspective, you can think about it like, we're all looking in this direction, and then this person has a different perspective, they're looking in this direction, and then this person, and they overlap some, but like, I want to be looking in every edge of my peripheral vision needs to be looking for solutions to whatever problem we're solving, and gathering information and gathering talent and whatever it is. And it's just so important to have that as early as possible. And if you plant that seed, then the rest of your company is going to follow. Then mm-hmm. you will have an easier time building a diverse team as you grow. Mm-hmm.
One of the terms we use to describe the success of an entrepreneur is their ability to, quote unquote, hustle. When it comes to other machine company, were there any instances where you had to improvise or hustle to make your company successful?
Well, every time I had to close funding, I had between 2 and 6 weeks of runway, and usually between 15 and 25 employees. So I feel like it goes beyond hustle. It's a type of hustle that is so infused with faith that it's almost mystical. It's like, yes, I'm going to stay up, and my body won't let me sleep anyways when I'm in one of those modes. I'm up at like between 3 and 5 a.m. and my brain is just going like, what are other ways? Who are other people? Like, what are other avenues I could do to get this problem solved? And there's no reason to think that you'll be successful in that situation. Because why? And so you're infusing that intense hustle with this faith that I just have to keep pushing and it will work. And I think I didn't know that I had that before I started doing a startup. But when I think back to, well, I was some kid in the middle of Arkansas. How did I ever think I was going to go to MIT or be here sitting with you, having successfully sold a company that I grew in Silicon Valley? Like, that's a bizarre story. There's no way to be that kid and think that that's going to happen. But if you just keep doing it, I think you either win or you gain enough skills to win the next time. So, yeah.
So your experience with Kickstarter, for instance, does that relate to that, that kind of hustle? I mean, you're having to do viral marketing, reach directly out to the consumers. Can you talk a little bit about how you tried to use Kickstarter to gain traction?
Yeah, our plan with Kickstarter was to talk to a few key people that had really large Rolodexes that were in our area and convince them to let us spam their whole contact list. And in addition to that, we planned at least 3 in-person events for each week, and then all day we were just going on the internet. There were 6 of us at the time, and going on the internet and trying to find people that we thought would be early adopters. So we did try to get press and all of that, but it was just straight legwork. And you connect to one person and they sign up for the backer reward and you see who it is and then you're like, oh, that person, okay, who do they know? And it was a little bit contagious, I think, for our backers. And I think we ended up with like 650 backers or something like that. Mm-hmm. 200 people had bought machines, and the machine was $1,500, which I don't know if anybody has backed a Kickstarter campaign, but putting $1,500 into a Kickstarter campaign on a piece of hardware is a huge risk. But we got people to sign up, and so it was another point of this hustle and making sure that it was going to happen. Like, we were going to let nothing stand in the way of meeting our goal. Mm-hmm. And our goal was much larger than, we met the Kickstarter goal in right. 24 hours, but we really needed way more money than that. And that just blended into fundraising for me.
And it paid off, right? You went significantly over the Kickstarter goal that you initially set, right? Mm-hmm. Something like 6 times the amount?
Yeah, but for us, it was the validation of the idea that was more valuable than the money. And in fact, having $300,000 to deliver this product basically would mean there was no margin for mistakes, no margin on cost of goods, no employees. Like, you wouldn't really be able to deliver it for that. Mm-hmm. It took $1.8 million in the end, which we raised and delivered those products. But if we hadn't done that, we would not have had a story to tell to investors. It was the quickest customer feedback we could possibly get.
Who came up with the idea?
The Kickstarter campaign? Mm-hmm. Well, in 2013, everybody had a Kickstarter.
Okay.
So,
so you started out your company in Other Lab in San Francisco, mm-hmm. right? Technology incubator. Austin is a very technology-driven city. We have Apple, Google, IBM, Oracle. We have the Capital Factory downtown led by Joshua Baer with a ton of startups in it. But I was wondering, as a successful entrepreneur, are there any aspects related to Austin that you think might set us apart when it comes to attracting future entrepreneurs? Oh,
absolutely. If you're in hardware, you should be here, because you can last for twice as long on the same amount of money, and you probably need twice as long if you're in hardware. And I think that you can do the legwork on supply chain with what exists here to make products, whether it's medical devices or robotics. So I think in 5 years, we'll see Austin as a startup hub, but for hardware. In the way that we don't see as much success in the Bay Area for that, because it's too darn expensive.
Mm-hmm. As a successful entrepreneur, You must frequently be asked to support different philanthropic and volunteer causes. You seem like you have a busy schedule. You have a lot going on. How do you balance and decide and prioritize what you're going to dedicate your time to and how many resources you provide to it?
Yeah, well, I always keep a buffer in my schedule for people, specifically whoever is underrepresented in science and engineering or robotics. If you reach out to me, I'm going to listen to you at least for a half an hour. And so that's my idea of philanthropy, because I don't have any money, but I have some time. And that amount of time pays back to me, and it pays back to my network, who are always looking for more talent. And so that is me paying it forward. And besides that, it was a weird transition to get to the point where if you said yes to everything, your schedule will be totally overflowed. And how do you know who to say yes to? How do you know who it's like, whose urgency is real? Mm-hmm. And so I just started charging people money. Mm-hmm. And it was an easy way of being like, okay, if you're going to come to me, you have to answer these 10 questions, and it'll cost you, whatever, $50 an hour. But there needs to be some way of sorting through it. So I think it is a different kind of philanthropy, but for me, people mostly just want my time.
Mm-hmm. You recently announced on Twitter, following up with philanthropy, I don't think it's a philanthropic endeavor entirely, but Daughters of Rosie aimed at increasing the number of women entering manufacturing by 2 million by 2025, I believe.
That's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? It sounds exciting.
Yeah. So Daughters of Rosie, we support manufacturers who want to hire women. And currently in the United States, we have over 600,000 manufacturing jobs that are unfilled. And even though automation is replacing some of the lower skilled jobs, we have a lot of baby boomers who are retiring. And this is a big group of people. And even though we have the automation, we have the baby boomers, we've got an issue with manufacturing labor. And it's going to grow to 2 million at least by 2025. And I read this study that by Deloitte that has all this data in that, and I thought, I can't not do something about this, because I set out to build these machines and increase access, and I feel like I did the machine part, and now it's time to do the access part. Mm-hmm. And it's aimed at this problem, but using a play from World War II. There was one other time that we had a problem like this, and we solved it by training women in women-only training facilities. And so what we do is we work with the manufacturers to set up women-only training facilities in local technical colleges. And our promise to that manufacturer is, even though you've had a heck of a time attracting women, we're going to fill that program with women. And it makes it a lot easier for women to enter a manufacturing workforce because there's a group. There's 10 or 20 women, and that feels really different. As a woman who's walked into a lot of rooms filled with totally men, if I had 9 ladies beside me, it would feel really different. And that's what it's going to feel like for these ladies in manufacturing as well. And the only difference is these jobs are permanent, and these jobs are going to make a significant impact on our economy and our ability to be competitive over the next decade.
In addition to that, you've also been a strong advocate for apprenticeship-based, hands-on learning styles. Mm-hmm. What steps do you think larger universities, if any, should be taking to adapt and maybe implement those types of techniques?
Yeah, well, I just hung out with Professor Kofar, and he told me about a totally experiential program in material science for this material science minor. And he said that the students are in there, and he'll walk in and he'll lay a bunch of samples on the table and say, tell me what this is. And so there's this huge hands-on element of, well, how do we even start? What do we do? And it's very much focused on problem solving. And I think that's got to be a part of everybody. That's got to be a part of every major, is learning how to approach a problem, dissect it. Some of that is going to be physical stuff. You're going to need to be able to draw from a lot of different disciplines. And so I think the more cross-pollination you get, the more classes that are like this material science class, where you can you're just thrown into a problem, and it is expected that you'll be able to deliver the answer. That gives it like a huge amount of responsibility, but that's going to be applicable your whole life. Those skills will be useful no matter where you go, however big your team is. And I think that more universities will start doing it because the students that take those classes and come out are the ones who are going to get the best jobs.
In terms of running your own company, one of the things that comes up a lot in business classes right off the bat is the value of networking and the value of finding partners to form companies with that complement your skill sets. Your co-founder was the former founder and CEO of MakerBot, I believe.
Oh yeah, the owner of my company now.
Right. When it comes to his role in your company, how does that complement your skill set?
Well, I wish I had him from the beginning, that's for sure, because I am much more focused on the product and specifications and what is our design process and acquiring talent and the operations of the business. And he is such a genius at marketing and sales process and figuring out the exact messaging that you need to use to be compelling to your customer. And that's a full-time job. And if you can have both, it's just so much more powerful. I feel like sometimes I run into engineers and they feel like they can do everything. And yes, they could do everything, but they shouldn't, because then you are gonna move slow. And it's such a powerful thing to have a partner that you have complete faith in. You don't have to understand 100% of why what they do works, but to know that you're pointed in the same direction, you have the same goals, and there's someone who's running right alongside you, it's an incredible feeling. And I advocate for anybody who wants to start a company, maybe if you have a technology that you're interested in commercializing and you're the technical one, find the business one, because you're gonna be way more likely to succeed.
And then in terms of skills, just looking out at the audience, a lot of them are STEM majors, interested in entrepreneurship. As a researcher coming out of UT, you had a certain skill set, a certain set of experiences. What did you find yourself lacking in when it came to forming a company, and how did you acquire those new skills?
Oh, I didn't know how to talk in front of people. And it feels just like something, I just do it all the time now. I'm talking, most of my days are talking to people and connecting with people. But I had spent all day, every day in a lab for 6 years. And I didn't talk to enough different types of people either. And so being thrown into a fundraising situation or even running the DARPA project and having to communicate with the DARPA program manager was hard for me. And it was hard to feel okay being vulnerable and sharing my actual feelings and not overthinking everything. So if I had to go back, I would have had more practice doing that. I would have gotten more engaged. I would have pushed myself to be more of a community leader or just find more opportunities to talk to different people, feel uncomfortable, go into a group of people at the law school and try to make friends. Those kinds of situations I think would have benefited me quite a bit.
How did you go about acquiring those new skills once you came out of the academia setting? It's very structured, very organized. How did you go about doing that?
Just a desire to survive. I wanted this company to exist, and so there's no other choice. Just go out and do it.
So just hands-on, right in the mix of things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk to one person, say, do you know this person? Then go meet with that person, then meet with that person, and then eventually it's easy.
Do you have any message to young women that are sitting in this room, sitting in STEM classrooms at this university, that may be looking at themselves and thinking, I see this person, they're very successful, they're a woman that has revolutionized manufacturing, I want to do something like that, but they either don't feel confident enough or they don't know what the path looks like?
Oh, I'd probably say, first of all, you're brilliant, you're beautiful, you really can do anything that you want to do. And you don't have to ask permission from anyone to do it. Because if someone had said that to me, it would have meant a lot.
Mm-hmm. And then I think, just as a last question, and then we'll go into the Q&A, you talked about difficult decisions, some of the most difficult decisions you've had to make as an entrepreneur. What were some of the best decisions that you made along the way?
Oh, nobody has ever asked me that.
Sorry.
Oh, I have one. Taking a chance on applicants who don't fit the job description, but you think have the underlying skills to do the work. So on my team right now, I have an R&D team of people who have worked with me for between 1 and 3 years, or 1.5 and 3 years, and they are incredible at designing our next product. And their backgrounds are art history and photography and acupuncture, and they're not people you would think of as mechanical design engineers or electronics R&D specialist or a hardware and software product manager. And they all started as manufacturing technicians, but there was something about them and the way that they worked together and the way that they worked with me. I thought, these are people who would have been engineers had they known what an engineer was, and had they had the opportunity to go to a more sophisticated school with an engineering program. And the best decision has always been to keep handing those people more and more responsibility and just ratcheting it up and being like, I'll be there for you. It's okay to fail, but you're gonna be so much stronger after this little phase that we're gonna go through. And that has been not only the most rewarding thing about my role as a CEO, but they're just incredible people, so dedicated to what we do. And we grew them ourselves. We sort of like grew the team together. And you can't get that by just hiring some mechanical engineer off the street. So that's definitely the best decision I made.
Awesome. So we're out of the official set of questions. So I think now, if it's okay with everyone, we'll open it up to Q&A. So if you have any questions for the speaker, please come up to either side of the microphone, and we can just take turns. Okay.
Okay, you mentioned it would have taken decades at Tesla to jump into the position and opportunity you've had in your own company.
To replace Elon Musk as CEO?
Yes. But I imagine leapfrogging those years and those positions also leapfrogged the mentors and the networks you would have built. Do you find your success lonely ever? And how, when you have a challenge, you're not exactly sure how to answer, where do you seek that, friendship, that community, and cultivate those mentors?
That was true in the beginning. Now it's not true, but it's as a result of needing to get better and meeting more people and just going out and doing it. I feel now that I have the support network that I need, and I do argue that it's one of the most important things about going off and on doing your own thing is having people to validate what you're doing or invalidate what you're doing. Because if someone tells you, no, that's not gonna work, you could save yourself a year or two, as long as you're open to that kind of feedback. So for me, it did take a while to build that. Now I have it. And I think you can only, I don't know what the figure is, it's something like 100 relationships. I think there's a limit to how many close relationships a human can have anyways. 150. Thank you. So maybe just try to get to that number as fast as possible and diversify.
So you talked a little bit about like your research at UT and then also like what you did obviously for all of this, and I was kind of wondering like how did the research environment differ? Like how does that change the way you work?
For me, the research environment was still a lot about problem solving for a specific purpose. When I started working with Professor Mantharam in the ME department, my goal was, I want to make a material that's going to reach people. And so I thought about how do I make the cheapest possible anode materials for lithium-ion batteries to be used in electric vehicles. So I had a really specific purpose and a customer, although the customer was someone like Tesla or DuPont or something. And after I did that research, I wanted to license the technology and form my own company. Well, it turns out a material science company is a pretty risky business, and nobody's really going to take a chance on someone right fresh out of grad school with the amount of money that you need to do it. And so the university ended up licensing the technology to a larger company. So for me, the environment was similar. It was like identify a need. I definitely wanted to have my work be relevant and specific to a real world application. But I will say I didn't have as much flexibility in the research world. I had more support. There's more people helping me not fail in the research environment than when I was out on my own. So those are the main differences for me.
So you are a lot like me. Like I'm guessing everyone here is a science major for one, but then for two, you're also, like you said, you're kind of shy at meeting people and whatnot, and I'm kind of the same way. So I'm trying to take your advice.
You're
and,
doing it.
Actually talk
You're
to
in
people
front of
right
a
now.
microphone.
I know, that's something. So I have a startup idea, and actually it's pretty recent, so I'm just looking for advice and like just different ideas or whatever else. But so in 2014, I had a traumatic brain injury. I broke my back, broke my collarbone, broke my eye orbital, and my hand. I was a mess. Anyways, I went and stayed at Brackenridge for 10 days. 7 of those 10 days, I was under a medically induced coma. Got let out of there, went to St. David's, Maine, stayed there for 3 months. They let me out, but they didn't trust me to let me back out into the wild, so I got put to a post-acute rehab center. Stayed there for another 3 months, got out of that, and then had outpatient rehab for 8 months. So this past winter break, I was talking to my mom about the injury and whatnot, and she was like, honestly, like, when you were in the hospital and the post-acute rehab center, like, you had nurses, you had therapists, like, everyone was there to take care of you. My mom's a nurse, by the way, but, like, you had, like, tons of people taking care of you, like, they knew what to do, like, they've done it before, whatnot. But she's like, when you came back home, that was honestly the toughest part, and I was like, that hurt. But she's like, no, I mean, like, it was tough because it was almost like we were bringing back our first kid again. Like, there's so much stuff that we didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to do it. And then, like, if you have a baby, there's tons of different books. There's, everyone's having a baby, so you can go just talk to some friends and whatnot. But, like, not everyone has a traumatic brain injury kid or whatever else. So it's hard to, like, communicate that with people. But anyway, so my startup idea was to be kind of like a coach or a mentor. I don't know the right word for it, but basically for kids or adult, anyone who has a traumatic brain injury and their loved ones, to help them, like, hey, this is what you should do next, kind of thing, and just kind of make a path for them, whatnot. I've been called up twice to St. David's, Maine to talk to 2 different patients. And, like, honestly, I did, and, like, I made a big difference in their life. And, like, I've never felt more rewarding before in my life. Like, it was the best experience ever. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Any advice or anything you can like to give?
Yeah, well, the story that you share and the thing that you feel inside is one of the most powerful things that you can have as an entrepreneur. You understand the customer in a really deep way, and you have this drive to support a group of people. And whether or not you end up doing a startup or just having a small business, well, that really just depends on the market. So I think at the core of what you have is this desire, and you really understand the problem well. And so if you have that, then I would just start running experiments like you're doing. Go to the hospitals, do some research, figure out how many people there are who could benefit from this. How much does it usually cost for a family to incorporate a family member back into their lives? And just start small. But if you find that there's a number of people that are really suffering from this same problem, then I would just go for it. You can probably find a unique way to solve the problem better than anybody else has, because you feel so strongly about it. So I would just keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Great.
Hello, thanks for being here.
Hello.
It's great to hear all you have to say. If money was no object and you had the perfect team, what problem would you like to put your attention to solve, and how would you do it?
Well, this is actually the same problem I'm trying to figure out how to solve now without any money or team. But I want to figure out how to navigate the transition of technology that happens in a university and products more easily. And I have some sense that it has to do with the transformation that a researcher goes through to become an entrepreneur. But I feel like, why haven't we solved this yet? Why isn't there an easy way to do this? And maybe it's totally me being naive, but I'd like to focus on that problem. It's kind of it's not like a thing that is easily accessible, but I find it the most fascinating, primarily because if we do it right, then we can continuously, well, first of all, more money would go into universities and research at the university level, but we can continue to improve technologies on a larger scale. Things that need more time for more research, we could actually make headway on if we solve that problem.
Hi. So I understand as a successful entrepreneur and businesswoman, it's very important to have time management skills. Could you kind of run through your process, your day-to-day scheduling, if you will, and how you go about doing that?
Sure. This started actually as a grad student. I had a kid when I was in grad school. He's now 13. And I was a single mom for a couple of those years as well. And so for me, every 15 minutes mattered. And so I always make a paper, I'm kind of old school too, graph paper with a list of all of my priorities for the next 2 weeks. And then I write out, every day. And of course I have a Google Calendar and all of that, but there's something about the permanence of thinking about how much time am I gonna have to think about things. And I just schedule everything in 15-minute increments, and then I stick to it. I do not deviate. But it took me a little while to figure out how to do that. I had to measure myself. I had to think, well, there's written in here is write an article for such and such. Well, how long does that take? I don't know. Well, I'll have to write a few, and then I'll figure out, well, it's gonna take me about an hour and a half to do that now. Now I know how to do it, but taking data on myself, being really explicit about what I was gonna do when, and making sure I stuck to it. Like if you start to deviate, then a thing that you thought was going to take 2 hours turns into 4 hours, turns into 6 hours. You can't do that. You have to be really disciplined about it. And I'm finding now, though, that I have a little bit more free time. It's jarring because I'm used to just like doing a thing every 15 minutes. So I will say it works when you need it to, but it's probably good to have some sort of balance, like some days of the week that are not totally scheduled and things. I do know, I have thought about also more recently, what's the breakdown of what I spend my time on, and making sure I leave a whole day where I don't have any meetings. It's just so I can do more creative thought, because it works better for me. But just taking data on yourself, being deliberate about it, being disciplined, but then also just experimenting with what works for you, depending on what the type of task is.
I have a follow-up to that.
Sure.
So there seem to be two work culture trends at odds with each other right now. You hear sometimes in the world of entrepreneurship, family, health, work, pick two. And then there's this craze around work-life balance and companies that brag about it and ask me about it in interviews. Where do you stand in your company culture, and do you see holes in either sort of, work culture people subscribe to or promote?
That's a hard one. And I think it has to do with what cycle you're in at a business. I think that there are times where you need to recharge and get that balance back, but then you always need to be able to push really hard. And you're gonna have to throw work-life balance out the window, because life is gonna happen and you have to fit a certain amount of things into a specific time period. And I'm big on deadlines. I like, if our team misses a deadline, it's a huge thing. So in order to meet deadlines, you have to crunch. Oh God. Sorry. It's a baritone saxophone, in case you're wondering. So in order to be able to compress that work to get done by the deadline, you do have to have these recharge phases. And I think that where people burn out is if they don't do that. They don't see it coming. For example, we have a big deadline on Friday with my team, and the two people who are the most critical to this took 3 days off in the 2 weeks before. It was like one person took 3 days off, and the other person took 3 days off, and they sort of covered for each other, and now they're ready for crunch time. And just being purposeful about doing that, I think, is really important. And the other thing I would say about it, for me, that's been pretty transformational, is not worrying that everything's gonna get done, because that eats up energy. And so if you don't feel like doing the thing, just don't do it. But don't worry that you're not doing it during that period of time. That has made a bigger difference than I would have thought in my personal stress level.
So to be a successful STEM-based entrepreneur, obviously you have to have the science part of it. What classes would you recommend students take in, say, business, that'll help them be more successful as entrepreneurs when they launch a science-based entrepreneurial venture? So what are 2 or 3 topics that you think would be most useful from the business side?
Number 1 is something on product market fit and how to find it. And if you don't know what product market fit is, it's pretty obvious. It's like how to build the right product for the right market that you're trying to go after. And the second one is go-to-market strategies. I think and go-to-market strategy is just what kind of things are we going to do in order to take our product and try to get it to the market. Having more exposure to different kinds of go-to-market strategies, I think, is super useful, because with especially a really raw technology, you're not really sure what it's going to do. And so knowing all of the possibilities, or a lot, like a big menu of possibilities, would be super valuable. And then the other thing is just basic finance and operations. Just knowing how to set up a budget to run your company, how to figure out how long is this going to take me? Well, if it's going to take me that long, I need this many people, and I need to raise X amount of money. Just those 3 things I think would be hugely useful. I would take those again, actually, just to get more exposure.
Thank you for your insightful comments. My question is around the transition that you made from your initial market with your product and then moving more into the professional market. So what were the things that caused that transition? And then you mentioned that it was a price jump from $2,000 to $3,000. Was that based off of a feature set, or is that based off of, hey, there's this much value that we can capture? They're willing to pay more, so we might as well charge more.
Yeah, the first thing that happened was we weren't able to sell as many machines as we needed to for the business to survive. So we had to change something. And we had a lot of success with the product by a subset of our customers who were using it all the time. They were the ones who were calling in with support requests, or they needed a new motor because they ran it for 48 hours milling aluminum, which is not really the best for. So those are the people that we narrowed in on as they've gotten the most value from our product so far. And so we did a bunch of research about who are they, how do they use it, why do they use it, and the part about price is it was sort of, would you pay for these extra features? And nobody, when people wanted to change something about the product, it was always around what was the precision, what was the smallest feature size that they could make in their PCB, and price was always last. It was like, oh, we want this feature, or we want this thing to be a little bit more usable, or I wish it wasn't as loud. And so the things that we focused on were the precision, so it could do 6 mil Drayson space, which is just a line or a little space, which is 6,000 7-inch wide, which is key for being able to use these smaller chipsets that our professional electrical engineers wanted to use. And they wanted it to be quieter. And I've completely forgotten what the third feature was, but there were 3 main features that we focused on. And oh, yes, we made the spindle higher RPM, which was also a little bit quieter. And we just identified that those were the things that they really wanted. And then they didn't care about price. And so we thought, well, they don't care about price. And if we sell the same amount of the machines, but at this higher price, then we will have a sustainable business. And so we just bumped it up to that amount.
Dr. Goodenough, as you know, is a big star around here, and he's invented a new battery. What do you think?
Boy, I wish I could just have the laundry list of things that Dr. Goodenough would do for the next 50 years, and I could just assign them to people to do. I think that, well, what do you mean, what do I think? It's amazing. And
I'm asking you a technical question.
Oh, a technical question?
Do you know anything about this?
Yes.
Is it going to work?
I think it will work. I don't know. Okay, what my misgivings are, I'm not exactly sure what it's for specifically. And I'm not sure that it's the kind of innovation that's going to be impacting the phone in our pocket. Because sometimes, like, well, the phone is already kind of light enough, and maybe I'll make it last twice as long, but is that really a big deal? So my battery interest is more around things like grid level storage, which I think are more important problems. But I don't want to insult the research. I think also you never know in material science. You go down a path and it seems strange, but then it leads you somewhere else. And it could lead to all kinds of new things. I mean, you used to be able to get a PhD just by putting materials up, heating a combination of 2 materials to a certain temperature and then looking at the structure. You could get a whole PhD just by looking at a combination of 2 materials. And so now you have to do things which are much more complicated. But boy, am I glad that somebody sat around and did all of that, because who knows? I'm talking about the creation of phase diagrams. If you're not in material science or mechanical engineering. I'm glad someone did that, not knowing where it was going to lead, because then the rest of us can build on that. And I think that this is a fundamental shift in the way we think about lithium-ion batteries. And so I think that it will lead somewhere new, but I'm not sure how applicable it is to the problems I think are the biggest problems in energy storage.
I was testing you. You know, your previous answers have indicated that your career trajectory is to go meta.
Uh-huh.
When you asked that really hard question about next, you said you're interested in the process by which research goes from.
Uh-huh.
That's going meta from where you are.
Yeah.
I thought I'd see if you wanted to go the opposite direction.
One of my favorite things, though, is to talk to people about their weird esoteric technology and understand it just well enough to be able to communicate it to someone else. And I don't know if I'm interested in going super deep, like back down to the laboratory decision level anymore. I was a pretty good student, but not a great student. I think that my skills are probably in the meta level more so than the detail of science level.
From an employer viewpoint, how do you identify those underlying skills that applicants may have, even if they don't come from those traditional qualifying backgrounds? Mm-hmm. And as an applicant, how do you make that apparent that you have those underlying skills?
For us, there's a couple of things that seem to be common threads among the really good employees. One is the ability to put themselves in someone else's shoes. And so I love to hire people who have had any kind of service in their background, because they're people who are, well, they're in service, so they are helping someone else. I think it's easier for them to put themselves in someone else's shoes. And for me, that's the first principle of design, is you're not yourself, you're the person with the problem. And so as an applicant, you can, well, first of all, get experience doing service and then put that on your resume. That's something that I would recognize as being valuable. The second thing is a thing that I think you can learn, but it is the ability to fail in front of people. And so I look for that most specifically for people who have had career changes, and often more than one. People who have achieved success in an area which was not the area that they studied in sometimes. And so if you're an applicant and you have had experiences where you went into a field, you gained a lot of skills, maybe it isn't completely applicable to the job that you're applying for, but I would include it, because a broad range of experiences is super valuable to a startup like ours. And I think those are the two. I also look for people who have done projects on the side that have required significant effort, and whether that is a thing that they've built, or they're an Eagle Scout, or they were a champion ballroom dancer, or whatever, because it requires a level of discipline. And I think that product development teams thrive on discipline. So I would also, if there's a thing that you've been passionate about, that you've dedicated a significant amount of time to, just throw it in at the bottom, because people will notice it. And if you were applying for a job wherever I'm working, I'm definitely going to take notice of it, because it indicates these softer skills that are sometimes overlooked but really valuable. This may be the most number of questions I've ever had. Very excited.
Hi, my name is Patricia, and I just wanted to listen. I listened to your story, and I thought all of your successes were very admirable. But I do know with every success comes plenty of failure. So I wanted to know, what was your number one influencer, your motivator that helped you get back up every time that you failed, and every time that you were stuck in a corner that you got lost or anything? What was your number one motivator to get you out of there?
Well, number one, I figured I could always go back to Arkansas. I could just go home and be there. And that was really helpful, because it made me realize I wasn't risking. I was risking much, but I wasn't risking my my ultimate survival. Like, Arkansas is a great place. I could live there easily, and that was really important. It gave good perspective. Like, yes, I could totally fail at this moment, but I'll still be fine. Like, I'll be okay no matter what. And the other motivator is a thing I think we talked about with this other person who asked a question, is the complete dedication to your customer. And in this case, for me, I felt that if we didn't do this, there wasn't going to be a way for kids to have good access to these kind of tools. And I wouldn't be able to do things like Daughters of Rosie and give people a lot of exposure to CNC for a low cost. And I thought about, well, if there's nobody like me working on this stuff, who's going to do it? And I just kind of thought back to me as a kid and the other me's that are out there. And that is extremely motivating, because it's got to come from somewhere. It can't just be for the money. And for me, that was really important.
I guess really quick, but going
Sure.
back to your first answer about like going back home, what would you say for the first generation scholars on like that perspective where there isn't really a back home for them?
Yeah, gosh, I haven't thought about that. Well, that shows an area that I need to think more about. There isn't a going back home. I still think it's worth it. I think that the alternative is really dark. Like, not trying leads nowhere. And so in some ways, even if you don't have the fallback, it's like one of the greatest things about humanity, I think, is finding a purpose, finding a direction to go in, and feeling that engagement with a purpose. Like, something is pulling you somewhere. And I think that's valuable even if you end up failing and there isn't a place to go. Because everyone around you also is going to see that. And you may not be the one who succeeds, but you may inspire someone who succeeds also. I'm going to have to think about that one. That was like one of the deeper questions I've gotten.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Amid all this talk of success and startups, I wanted to ask you, what exactly do you see as your measure of success now, and will you reach a point where you're satisfied with all the success that you have, and if so, when would that be?
The question at the core of that to me right now is like, am I satisfied? Am I making moves in my life out of dissatisfaction or out of curiosity? And I think there was a point in time where I shifted from, I have to survive, I have to get out, I have to get on top, I have to get out of debt, all those things. And that time passed, and I feel like that was the point where I felt successful personally. And because I could take care of myself and my kid and things like that. And so that felt like success for me. And now there is a part which is, my own sense of worth that is tied to helping other people achieve success. So maybe the answer is that I'm curious about how to help as many people as possible achieve success. And that's what's moving me forward, whether it's getting 2 million women into manufacturing or helping researchers turn their idea into something great. And maybe that's the reason why meta is so much in my vocabulary right now, is because it is more about service at this point.
Do you think you would call that love?
I do. That's great. I do think I would call that love. Don't get me to cry on stage. I almost made it.
Hello. I guess kind of going back to that question, have you noticed any fundamental shift in like the way you approach perhaps your company or the problems that you take on from when you were like trying to survive, make ends meet versus now that you have the flexibility and I guess the resources to kind of do what you want to do?
Yeah, I feel much more empowered to say the things that I really feel and do the things on a day-to-day basis that don't seem obvious, but I feel pulled towards. So I think I've moved more from a reactionary problem solver thing into more of an intuitive mode. And I can't explain why it's working, but it feels like it's working better. Well, actually, I think it's because it brings both halves of me together, which is not just the logical, can't take risks kind of side with the intuitive, like, I feel a thing, but I'm not really sure about this. And I think when you can do both of those things, you can be pretty powerful. And I've only really felt comfortable using my intuition after, being out of survival mode.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I had one more question. So you kind of talked about like how you had like a schedule where you planned like every 15 minutes and like you were very like high achieving, getting so many different things done. And you also kind of explained that you had a kid already in grad school. And I think I'm also kind of a person that's like on the clock at all times, but I'm like trying to kind of like have more of a balance sometimes. Like how did you manage to have like a balance between like your family life as well as like grad school or even beyond that?
I think I'm, deep in the midst of trying to figure that out. Like I've tried to slow down and I can't. My schedule fills up with stuff. And so I have decided to so I dance. So I've just been going to dance 3 times a week, 2 hours at a time. And I feel like it allows me to feel more connected to not so much here, but the rest of my existence. And it slows me down enough that when I go home, I don't feel like doing anything. And so for me, if I just went home, I would just work a whole bunch. But if I go to dance and I spend that time pulling myself out of the clouds during the hours, then I can actually let myself relax for longer periods of time afterwards. But I think you're just gonna have to sort that out. I don't know. We could go to dance.
I have a question. Do you have a favorite or a few favorite stories of innovations that have happened as a result of you making this manufacturing more accessible?
Oh yeah, I have a favorite one. I'll just tell one because I could go on forever. But there was this group at MIT who were just messing around. They were like biologists and they wanted to do microfluidics research. So microfluidics is, well, tiny fluids, tiny volumes of things, mixing them together, figuring out properties. And it affects things like drug discovery and areas like that. And in order to do their research, it would have cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. But they took our machine and realized they could fabricate these small structures and do all the testing, and our machine was only $3,000. And so instead of needing $300,000, they could do the same research with $3,000, which is really insane. When you can reduce the cost of a particular area of research by that much, it's really impactful. And they thought, well, not every biologist is going to know how to design these things and design it for the CNC machine. So we're going to make an app that will allow other researchers who don't have experience with CNC to plug in the inputs and outputs and kind of like the parameters of the microfluidic system, and then it would create the files that would be sent to our machine. So not only did they transform their ability to do research for way cheaper, they just unlocked this power for everybody in their industry. And that just floors me. Like that is amazing because that's the whole point to me, is if you put a technology out there, how are people going to transform their industries? And I think it's that access that, when it happens, right, it's really amazing. And the part about them not stopping there at their own research, but putting a little bit of extra time in to help everybody else was really powerful to me.
Sorry, so last question. And thank you so much. This has been incredible and so powerful. And you mentioned the yous walking around, and even though you didn't notice gender inequity in the workplace, specifically, you are a role model now for the next generation, right? And so I just want to hear, who are some of your top role models, those while rising up in your journey, and then any resources, literature, some of your top books that you could recommend for up-and-coming entrepreneurs?
Oh, jeez. Role models for me were mostly just people that were in my life that had been entrepreneurs, people nobody else would even know about. So people that I think I could more easily replicate than kind of a lofty, on a pedestal role model. But I most recently have been inspired by the woman who runs Backstage Capital. And Arlen is just, she's just incredible. And I feel like that's the core of when someone is so focused and so dedicated and they're just not gonna let this thing not happen. That's who I've been inspired by lately, just her story, and I hope that she gets everything she wants in the world ever, and that all the people she works with do too. So that's a kind of everyday role model for me. And the books I would recommend, there's this book, it's a parenting book, but has actually helped me communicate with people quite a bit. It's called Listen. And it's about, the fundamental of the book is that someone's gonna come at you and they're gonna have, they're throwing a tantrum or whatever it is. And you could react to their tantrum or react to whatever it is that they say, or you could pause and think about, oh, first I need to connect with this person. Because until I connect with this person, they're not gonna be receptive to whatever it is I have to say. And it's the same with kids or people that are at your workplace. So that's been my favorite book. And then this is a super random leadership-y book, but it's called The Executive's Compass. And it just talks about how there's a balance between things like liberty and equality. And those things are in balance. And every decision that you make is somewhere on this continuum, and you're sort of between these four poles. You're somewhere in this, and it just acknowledges that there's different ways of thinking about every problem and different ways of being a leader. And I just never thought about the landscape of decisions made in that way, and it has made me feel more confident actually about politics and the flow of things from one pole to the other, and sometimes pretty dramatic. So I would recommend those two books. They're pretty short too.
How do you find your purpose for a startup, and what have you learned from your failures?
The purpose for the startup came from finding a customer that I really wanted to serve, and we've touched on that a little bit. The importance of that is that you need something to hold on to when times get tough, and learning from the failures is I don't want to say there's no such thing as failure, but literally they're all learning opportunities, and we're failing at things all the time. But I see it as more like, we're gonna run a bunch of experiments, and some are gonna be in the positive move us forward category, and some are gonna be in the move us backward category, but it's all just open questions. And so I guess I'm not going to say there are no failures because that just sounds really cheesy, but there's just something you can learn from every failure, and there's just so many.
I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. This has been really fun. I want to thank our guest speaker. Can everyone give her a round of applause?